If someone had asked me 6 months ago what could destroy my marriage, I would have said cheating, maybe lies, maybe money. I never would have guessed it would be my wife slowly putting another man ahead of me while insisting nothing was wrong. The moment everything changed didn't happen because I caught her doing something unforgivable. It happened because of one sentence she said during an ordinary argument in our kitchen. Looking back now, I realized the signs had been there for months. I just kept convincing myself that love meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt one more time. Emily and I had been married for 6 years. We weren't the couple who posted perfect pictures online, but I honestly thought we had something solid. We worked hard, laughed a lot, and always found our way back to each other after disagreements. Every Friday was pizza night. Every Sunday morning started with coffee and grocery shopping. It wasn't exciting, but it was ours. That's why I didn't hesitate when Emily told me her college ex, Ryan, had moved back to our city. She asked if I minded if they grabbed coffee to catch up. I smiled and told her I trusted her. At that moment, I truly meant it. For the first few weeks, everything seemed harmless. One coffee became lunch, lunch turned into occasional dinners after work. Then came the late-night phone calls and constant text messages. Every time we planned something together, Ryan suddenly had a problem that only Emily could help with. Whenever I admitted it made me uncomfortable, she smiled, called me sweet, and reminded me that he was only a friend. I wanted to believe her, because trusting the person you love is easier than accepting the possibility that something is changing. That Thursday, I left work early because we hadn't spent a real evening together in weeks. I stopped by the grocery store, bought everything I needed to make her favorite pasta, and even picked up a slice of cheesecake from the bakery she loved. There wasn't any special occasion. I simply missed spending time with my wife. By 7 o'clock, dinner was ready. By 7:30, it had gone cold. At exactly 8, my phone buzzed. The message read, "Running late." I replied, "Everything okay?" A minute later, another text appeared. "Ryan called. He's having a rough day. I'll explain when I get home." I stared at my phone for a long time. Strangely, I wasn't angry. I was tired. It felt like every plan we made together came with an invisible condition. If Ryan needed her, I automatically came second. I hated thinking that because it made me feel insecure, but after months of hearing the same excuse, it became impossible to ignore. Emily finally walked through the front door a little after 9. She dropped her purse on the counter, looked at the untouched dinner, and quietly said, "I'm sorry. Today got complicated." I looked at the cold food before answering. It usually does whenever Ryan calls. She sighed and rubbed her forehead. "Can we please not do this tonight?" I stayed calm. I'm not trying to fight. I just want to understand why every time we make plans, they stop mattering the moment he needs you. She crossed her arms. "Because he's going through a difficult time." I nodded slowly. "And what about us?" She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I feel like my wife keeps choosing another man's problems over her own marriage." Her expression changed instantly. "Oh my God. Are you seriously jealous of my ex?" I shook my head. "I'm not jealous, Emily. I'm hurt. There's a difference." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then frustration took over her face. "You know what?" she snapped. "Ryan will always be part of my life. That's never going to change just because you're uncomfortable with it." The room went completely silent. She expected me to argue. Instead, I looked her in the eyes, nodded once, and quietly said, "Noted." She stared at me in confusion. "That's it?" I picked up the cold dinner plates and walked toward the sink. "Yeah," I said without looking back. "Now I finally know where I stand." She thought my silence meant the argument was over. She had no idea. It was the moment everything started to change. The next morning felt strangely normal, at least on the surface. Emily acted as if the argument had never happened. She made coffee, asked if I wanted eggs, and even smiled before leaving for work. A week earlier, I would have smiled back and pretended everything was fine. This time, I simply thanked her, grabbed my keys, and left. I wasn't trying to punish her. I had just stopped pretending that one apology could erase months of feeling ignored. For the first time since we'd been married, I drove to work without calling her on my lunch break. It wasn't planned. It just never crossed my mind. Around 10 that morning, my phone buzzed. It was Emily. Her message read, "Are we okay?" I stared at the screen for a few seconds before replying with 2 simple words, "I'm working." A few minutes later, another message appeared. "Can we talk tonight?" I locked my phone without answering. It wasn't because I wanted to ignore her. I already knew how that conversation would end. I'd explain why I was hurt. She'd tell me Ryan was just a friend. I'd apologize for overthinking, and nothing would change. We'd already had that conversation more times than I could count. Later that afternoon, my friend Mark stopped by my office. We'd known each other since college, and he could tell something was wrong the second he saw me. We grabbed coffee across the street, and for the first time in months, I told someone the truth. I told him about Ryan moving back, the canceled dinners, the endless phone calls, and the argument from the night before. Mark listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and quietly said, "This isn't really about Ryan, it's about priorities. If your wife knows she's hurting you and still expects you to accept it, then the biggest problem isn't him." His words stayed with me all afternoon. I realized I had spent months questioning my own feelings instead of questioning the situation. Every time I felt uncomfortable, I convinced myself I was insecure. Every time Emily dismissed my concerns, I accepted it because I loved her. Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking whether my feelings mattered too. When I got home that evening, I immediately noticed candles on the table and the smell of homemade lasagna. Emily rarely cooked during the week, so I knew she'd made an effort. As soon as I walked in, she smiled nervously and said, "I wanted tonight to be better." I smiled politely, took off my jacket, and sat down. We ate in silence for a few minutes before she finally spoke again. "I'm sorry about yesterday," she said softly. I looked up. "What part are you sorry for?" She hesitated. I shouldn't have raised my voice. I waited, expecting more. Nothing came. She wasn't apologizing for canceling our plans. She wasn't apologizing for choosing Ryan again. She was only apologizing for how the argument sounded. Halfway through dinner, she quietly added, "I didn't talk to Ryan today." I nodded once. "Okay." She frowned. "That's all you're going to say?" I put my fork down and looked at her. "Emily, you don't have to give me daily updates. That's not what I've been asking for." "Then what do you want?" "I want to feel like your husband again." She looked down at her plate and didn't answer. For the first time in months, there was nothing left for either of us to say. And for the first time, I noticed she wasn't worried about defending Ryan anymore. She was starting to wonder if she was losing me. The next few days were surprisingly quiet. There were no arguments, no raised voices, and no uncomfortable conversations about Ryan. From the outside, we probably looked like a normal married couple again. We left for work together, had dinner at the same table, and talked about ordinary things like bills, work, and weekend plans. But the silence between us wasn't peaceful. It was different. I had stopped asking questions, and Emily seemed relieved by that. She probably believed I'd finally accepted her friendship with Ryan. The truth was much simpler. I had stopped chasing answers from someone who clearly didn't want to give them. The following Friday, I finished work earlier than expected and drove home. Emily wasn't there, so I made myself a sandwich and turned on the TV. About 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from her. "Running a little late. Don't wait for dinner." I looked at the screen, typed one word, and hit send. Okay, that was it. No questions. "No. Where are you?" "No. Are you with Ryan?"
A few months earlier, I would have asked all of those things.
Now, I wasn't interested in hearing another excuse. About an hour later, Mark called and asked if I wanted to grab dinner with him. Normally I would have said no, because I'd still be hoping Emily would come home. This time, I agreed without thinking twice. We spent a couple of hours talking about work, sports, and everything except my marriage. Honestly, it felt good to laugh again. On the drive home, I took a different route because traffic was backed up near the highway. That's when I noticed a familiar SUV parked outside a small cafe a few blocks from downtown. It looked exactly like Emily's. I slowed down without really thinking about it. As I drove past the front window, I saw her sitting inside. Across from her was Ryan. They weren't arguing. They weren't talking about some emergency. They were smiling, laughing, and sharing dessert like two people who didn't have a single worry in the world. I sat at the red light for a few seconds, watching through the glass. Then the light turned green, and I drove away. What surprised me most wasn't what I saw. It was what I didn't feel. There was no anger, no panic, no jealousy, just clarity. For months, I'd been wondering if I was imagining things. Standing there would have changed nothing. I didn't need another explanation because I had already seen enough. She had told me she was running late. She never mentioned Ryan. She didn't have to. The lie wasn't in what she said. It was in what she chose to leave out. When I got home, Emily arrived about 40 minutes later carrying 2 coffees. "I thought you'd like one," she said with a smile. I thanked her and took the cup. As she set her bag on the counter, a receipt slipped onto the floor. The logo at the top caught my attention immediately. It was from the exact same cafe where I'd seen her with Ryan. She quickly picked it up before saying, "I stopped for coffee on the way home." I simply nodded. "Looks good." She smiled, clearly believing I'd accepted the explanation. What she didn't know was that I had already seen the part she left out. And for the first time since all of this started, I decided I wasn't going to tell her. Not yet. I didn't tell Emily that I'd seen her with Ryan. I wanted to know how far she was willing to take the lies without being confronted. For months, every uncomfortable conversation had ended the same way. She'd reassure me, I'd question myself, and somehow, I'd end up apologizing. That cycle was over. I wasn't interested in catching her anymore. I was interested in understanding who she had become when she thought I wasn't paying attention. The next morning, she seemed unusually cheerful. She made pancakes, laughed at something she saw on her phone, and even asked if I wanted to spend Saturday together. "Maybe we could finally have that movie night we've been talking about," end quote. She said with a smile. I smiled back and agreed. For a second, she looked genuinely happy, and I almost believed we were finally moving in the right direction. Then her phone lit up on the kitchen counter. She glanced at the screen, and her smile disappeared for just a moment. Without saying anything, she turned the phone upside down and slipped it into her pocket. It happened so quickly that most people would have missed it. I didn't. I still didn't ask who had texted her. The silence was starting to make her more uncomfortable than any argument ever had. That afternoon, I stayed home to clean the garage while Emily went shopping. I couldn't find an old warranty for my laptop, so I grabbed the tablet we both used for household bills. As soon as I unlocked it, a notification appeared from the shared calendar we had connected years earlier. "Dinner with Ryan, Saturday, 7 p.m. I stared at the screen. Today was Friday. The reminder had been created 2 days earlier. I checked it again, hoping I was misunderstanding something. I wasn't. The same Saturday she'd just asked me to keep free. She had already made plans with Ryan. I closed the tablet and sat there in complete silence. That hurt more than seeing them together at the cafe. This wasn't a last-minute emergency. This was planned. She had invited me to spend the evening with her, while already knowing she had no intention of being there. Saturday finally arrived. Everything about the morning felt strangely normal. We drank coffee together. We joked about a movie we wanted to watch. Around noon, Emily looked at her phone and sighed. "Oh no." I looked up. My manager just asked if I can cover someone's evening shift. She sounded disappointed. I told her we already had plans, but she's really short-staffed. Then she looked at me. "Would you mind if we moved our movie night to tomorrow?" For a few seconds, I simply looked into her eyes. She didn't know. I already knew the truth. I smiled politely. "Of course. Work comes first." She walked over, kissed me on the cheek, thanked me for understanding, and left the room. A few hours later, she walked out of the house wearing the same outfit she'd been wearing all afternoon. She waved at me from the driveway. "I'll see you tonight." I smiled and waved back. The second her car disappeared around the corner, I picked up my keys. If she was willing to lie this easily, then it was finally time for me to stop believing words and start believing actions. I kept a safe distance behind Emily's car, making sure she never noticed me. I wasn't proud of following my own wife, but after months of half-truths and broken promises, I needed to stop guessing. About 20 minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of the same cafe. A few seconds after she parked, Ryan arrived. They smiled when they saw each other, hugged briefly, and walked inside together. It wasn't a romantic embrace, but it wasn't the kind of greeting two people who barely talked would share either. I stayed in my car for almost an hour. Through the front window, I watched them laughing, sharing appetizers, and talking without looking at their phones once. I couldn't hear a single word, but I didn't need to. My wife had canceled our plans, lied about working, and chosen to spend her evening there instead. That was the only truth I needed. I quietly started my car and drove home before they came outside. I had no interest in creating a scene in the middle of a restaurant. Emily walked through the front door just before 10. She looked tired, but not the way someone looks after a long shift. She smiled when she saw me sitting on the couch. "Work was crazy tonight," she said as she kicked off her shoes. "I don't think I've ever been that busy." I looked at her for a moment and simply replied, "Sounds exhausting." Then I turned my attention back to the TV. She kept talking about customers, coworkers, and how happy she was the weekend was finally here. Every sentence made the lie bigger. I didn't challenge her once. The following morning, after Emily left to meet a friend, I picked up my phone and called the restaurant where she claimed she'd been working. I politely asked for the manager and introduced myself. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, "but I just need to confirm something. Did Emily cover a shift here last night?" There was a short pause before the manager answered. "No, she actually requested the entire evening off earlier this week." I thanked him, ended the call, and placed my phone on the table. That was the moment something inside me finally settled. For months, I'd been searching for proof that my instincts were wrong. Instead, I found proof that they had been right all along. Maybe she hadn't cheated physically. Maybe she had. At that point, it honestly didn't matter anymore. Trust isn't destroyed by one dramatic moment. It disappears one lie at a time, until one day you realize there's nothing left to hold on to. That evening, Emily walked into the living room carrying 2 movie tickets. She smiled and held them up. "I thought we could finally have our movie night tomorrow." I looked at the tickets, then back at her. For a second, I almost felt sorry for both of us. She was trying to fix a marriage without admitting what had broken it in the first place. I took a slow breath and quietly said, "Before we make any more plans, there's something we need to talk about." The smile disappeared from her face instantly. For the first time since all of this started, she looked genuinely afraid. Emily slowly placed the movie tickets on the coffee table and sat across from me. The smile she'd walked in with was completely gone. "What is it?" she asked quietly. I looked at her for a few seconds before answering. "I know you weren't at work on Saturday." She froze. "What do you mean?" "I called your manager this morning." The color drained from her face. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "You called my job?" "I did." She looked down at the floor. "I can explain." I shook my head. "No, I don't want another explanation. I want the truth." Tears filled her eyes. "I lied because I knew you'd get upset." I leaned forward. "No, Emily. You lied because you already knew what you were doing would hurt me." She covered her face with both hands. "It wasn't an affair. I never asked if it was. We never kissed. I didn't ask that either." She slowly looked up. "Then what do you want from me?" I took a deep breath. "I want to understand why my wife kept choosing another man over her own husband." She couldn't answer. The silence lasted almost a minute before she finally spoke. When Ryan came back, everything felt familiar. We talked about old memories, college, and the life we used to have. I kept telling myself it was harmless. Every time you questioned it, I convinced myself you were overreacting because admitting the truth would have meant admitting I was crossing boundaries. I nodded slowly. "So you knew?" She closed her eyes. Deep down, yes. Tears rolled down her face. "I never planned to leave you," I answered softly. But every lie pushed us further apart. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "I'll end it today. I'll block him. I'll do counseling. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, don't let 6 years end like this." I gently pulled my hand away. "This didn't happen because of one dinner." She looked at me through tears. "It happened because every time I asked you to protect our marriage, you protected your friendship instead." She broke down crying. "I'm so sorry." For the first time in months, I believed she meant it. The problem was, some apologies arrive after the damage is already done. The following week, I packed a few bags and moved into a small apartment across town. A month later, we started the divorce process. There were no screaming matches, no revenge, no dramatic courtroom moments, just 2 people signing papers while quietly accepting that trust, once broken enough times, doesn't magically come back. About 3 months later, a mutual friend told me Ryan had accepted a job in another state and moved away. After everything Emily had risked to keep him in her life, he was gone. They stopped talking a few weeks later. Hearing that didn't make me happy. It just made me realize how temporary some people are, and how permanent the consequences of our choices can be. Sometimes, people think relationships end because of one huge mistake. I don't believe that anymore. I think they end because of hundreds of small decisions that slowly teach one person they're no longer the priority. The most painful part wasn't losing my marriage. It was realizing I'd been fighting alone for a long time before it ended. And looking back, the most important word I said that night wasn't goodbye. It wasn't, "I love you." It was simply, "Noted." So tell me, if you were in my position, would you have given your marriage one more chance? Or would you have walked away the moment the trust was gone? Let me know in the comments.